called The Voice. And because we're good people, I think we're good people and we want the best for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. As a busy working person, you just hear The Voice and you think, great, I want them to have a voice. And you move on, and that's about as much detail as you have. You think, what can that hurt? We want a voice that'll help them. Anything we can do. I think society, we know there's a problem with an overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in lots of statistical areas that aren't good, high suicide rates, lots of children being removed from families, domestic violence, alcohol abuse, poor health, diabetes. We know this, unemployment. And so people want the best. So they hear something like The Voice and people know the history and they feel bad and they just want to help. So I think when you look at the yes votes, it really comes down to compassion, and the name The Voice evokes that compassion. But what people need to realize is The Voice is just the name. It's the name of a piece of legislation. And to really decide if you're into that piece of legislation, you need to know a little bit about what it's about. Although I would say, and I think if people knew what it was about, they wouldn't be happy. For me, I looked into the detail, but I quickly realized that it was just the concept that was wrong as well. I read a really fantastic book. I don't know if you've read Burden of Culture. This is the best book I've ever read by Gary Johns. And it's called The Burden of Culture, Dismantling the Aboriginal Industry. And I think Gary Johns is absolutely passionate about improving the welfare of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. And he was completely against The Voice and the rest of the Aboriginal industry. And reading that book, as well as going out in the community, I realised we really need to move to a system based on needs, not based on race. And people say, well, don't you think, there's been a disadvantage because of this and that and this history? I'm sure there has been. We have to acknowledge that lots of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are survivors. They've overcome their history and they're doing really well. There's still an overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders not doing well. There's lots of people who are not Indigenous not doing well. In fact, the vast majority of people in South Australia, 75, 76%, who are in poverty or homeless or at risk of being homeless, are not
75%.
Are not Indigenous. The vast majority are not Indigenous. That's not to say that from that small Indigenous population, we've not got an overrepresentation, but it's needs-based support that is the fairest way to help everybody.
Fair enough. And I want you to get into that a little bit more, but let me just clarify that bit you just said.
Yeah.
You said 75% of people are on the verge of it, or 75% of the people that are on the verge of it are
exactly.
not
75%,
Indigenous.
yeah. So
25% of people on the verge of homelessness and such and actual poverty, 25% of that is Indigenous and 75% is other cultures.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So of the group that are in poverty, 25% are Indigenous, 75% are not. And people say, well, that's a huge portion of Indigenous.
Yeah, I mean, given that they're 3.8% of the population,
it is
obviously huge.
It is, but it doesn't negate the fact that most people who are in those struggling positions are not Indigenous. So when we say, well, we're going to do this for this group but not for this group, you're actually missing out the biggest group of people.